So last week we started this series, the journey of Peter, looking at this idea of conversion, of discipleship, of all of this being this lifelong process. Blake last week, I haven't listened to it yet, but from what I think he talked about this, even if looking at the life of Peter, you're seeing from his beginning even to what we think might be the end of his journey, he's still changing and being discipled and being converted, and little bits of him are moving along the way. The evangelical church often points to hey, what was your conversion moment? And that overlooks that the whole life of the person is really a part of this. It's a lifelong process, not just one moment. You might say, last week, Peter leaving the nets behind out of curiosity, right? This unknown step into the unknown to follow, to come alongside, was his conversion moment. But then in the Last Supper, Jesus telling him, I see you're still being tempted. When you figure it out, you'll be able to help mentor the brothers. That's like the end of his journey, right? And then the extra biblical story of him fleeing persecution and coming alongside the vision of Jesus, heading back to be crucified again, and Peter realizing what his ultimate destiny was. The life of the whole person tells us about what their conversion, their experience, this idea of discipleship and follow and this means. You know, we often equate it to this exact moment that we're saved, but it doesn't mean that we're done with faith or in change in that moment. There's more to do beyond just this first step. So last week, this idea to follow out of curiosity into the unknown. Really, Peter doesn't know what's in store for him when he drops his nets aside, but out of a curious step. Jesus probably, not a well-known figure, but a figure there were murmurs about at the time, and he was wondering what possibly could be. And it's out of that curiosity he stepped outside of his fish and followed for the first time. So today we're going to go into what I think is kind of the next step. This sort of next movement of Peter's life that we can take a peek at. And it's Matthew 14, 22 through 36. It's a really familiar story, but I want to read it. And we've actually talked about it last year, but we're going to come at it from a different angle today. So if you're ready, Matthew 14, 22 through 36. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed them, he went up to the mountainside to pray by himself. And later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because there was wind against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter said, "tell me to come out and walk on the water." "Come." Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he said, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him and said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And then they climbed into the boat, and the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat whispered among them, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." We're going to have early participation this morning. So by show of hands, is there anyone who enjoys watching other people open gifts? Anybody like watching other people? Side story, I have 6 siblings. There's 7 of us. We're all married, so when we do Christmas, even just growing up, when there were 9 people, sometimes boyfriends or girlfriends were around, it was a mad dash to open gifts. My mother would write the fake names on the gifts, and we would know whose gift was who based on whose fake name it was. So one time it was the 7 dwarves, and my sister Valerie, I love her to death, she said, "I swear if I get Dopey, I will kill someone." And we switched Dopey's name tag off of Val's gifts in that moment. But we did the 7 dwarves, 7 days of the week, whatever it could be. We'd figure that out. We would just free for all open gifts. Who comes from a one person at a time open gifts family? I married into one of those. I don't know if you've ever watched a 4-year-old open a stocking, but it's slow and arduous. So I enjoy watching people open gifts I give them. I enjoy that. because I like to give gifts that are thoughtful. I like to think, what could I get someone? And I like watching people open gifts because there's that moment. It's an experiment, really. You think, I know this person, and I think I know what this person needs, what's something they'll enjoy. And you get that look on their face where their eyes light up because you thought about it and they really wanted to do that. That's why I love giving gifts that they really want. But there's the opposite of that, too, where there's a bit of a risk in the experiment, where you buy someone a gift and they have no idea why you got them that gift. They'll never use it. And I think that's hilarious too when it's not me doing it. Because you know the face as soon as they open it, that tone of voice that comes across. If you've ever been at a birthday party or anything, you've given someone a gift and they open it and they don't want it. There's that video on you. Oh, an avocado. Thanks. You know the voice in the face. I have only gotten it a few times in Ashley and I's marriage. Our first year we were married, maybe our second Christmas, I don't remember. She complained all lead up to Christmas about how she didn't like having her soup at work because she hated having to heat the soup up in the bowls at work because it was terrible and nothing ever worked. And I heard this and I was like, I know exactly what I'm going to get her. And I got her this big ceramic mug with like a lid and a valve, and it has a spoon attached to it because she takes soup every day. I was like, this is a great gift. And she opened it and she went, wow, it's a mug. And I went, it's for the soup. She was like, what soup? I was like, you said that you were like taking soup. I thought it was a great gift. Terrible gift. I don't even know where the bowl is anymore. But you've been there. You think, I've got it figured out. You slide it over and they go, wow. You know the look. It's not the gift for them. It's just not for them. There's a fake gratitude. And you know, oh, that's so nice. But we know in their head they're thinking, I don't know what in the world the point of this gift is for me. It's not a bad gift. It's not bad. You didn't give a bad gift. It's not useless. It's just that the person getting it has no idea what to do with it at all. Like, it would be a waste to give me a gift that would work for Ashley or for somebody else. It would be a waste. But it's just not for them. How is that gift going to work for them? And this is how when I read Scripture, this is how I get to a lot of things in Scripture. This is probably helpful for someone, I imagine. Useful, sure, why not? But for me, oh, that's nice. Oh, that's great. Like, you know that miracles and things in the New Testament, their function to help us remember God and be able to put the world right, all these things. Miracles are less a disruption of natural order and more things getting put back. So things like that I get, right? Jesus heals the blind man, reminding that God is in the work of healing people, setting their perception of the world right. That's a good gift. I like that story. When Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, he's able to push back the forces of death, even when it feels like it's too late. That's a good gift. I like that gift. That's a good one. When you see the four friends lower the guy, through the paralyzed man, down through the roof, and we hear him say, take up your mat and walk because your sins are forgiven. That's a good gift. I like that one too. Jesus is able to make things well again. He's able to make them clean, to repair the parts that are underneath the surface. That's a good gift. I like those stories. And then you get to Matthew 14. And Jesus and Peter walk on the water, and my response is, that's nice. I guess, sure. If I'm ever confronted with the need to step out onto water and know that I won't sink, wow, that must be really helpful for some people. I don't know, I'm less confident about how the church or people are supposed to take this and it'd be a gift to people that's worth receiving. So the reading today, it comes directly after the feeding of the 5,000 in Matthew. Jesus had just heard that his cousin John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod, and after hearing the news, he wants to go be alone. I don't know if you hear it right at the beginning. Immediately he says, go get in the boat, and he dismisses the crowd, and he goes to go to a mountainside by himself to pray. He wants to be alone. So he takes the boat to a lonely place where he assumes he could weep and mourn and pray and be by himself, but the crowds follow him. This is Just back it up just a smidge here. Herod kills John the Baptist, and when Jesus hears this, he withdraws to a boat privately to a solitary place, but the crowds follow him out of the towns. It's like, he's got the paparazzi following him wherever he goes. And so he sort of delays his time of grieving long enough to do a little bit more teaching and healing. But if you've ever been in a crowd of people, they get hungry, like people do when they listen to preaching. That's why Mexican restaurants do great in towns with churches in them. Everybody leaves here and goes and gets tacos. It's perfect. And so they get hungry. And so Jesus takes these 5 little loaves and bread and 2 fish. It's a little lunch pail, basically. If you imagine like the smallest leftover crumbs of someone's lunch, this is what we've got. And it says it feeds 5,000 men. Plus the women, plus the children. And afterwards, there's 12 baskets of food. And that's a gift I liked. I like that story. That's great. Not because I'm a big fan of lunch, which I am, but because I think there's something in there we can use. It's a good gift to give to someone. You end up in a church thinking, what do we have to offer that's not enough, but that God's going to do more with than we can imagine? That's a good gift. That's not the passage today, though, sadly. So we got to go a little bit farther down. And after this feeding, he withdraws and he commands the disciples to go across the sea. Maybe he's an introvert. Maybe there's this assumption made that he would rejoin them after some prayer. And we don't know how much time he spends by himself. But the disciples are sailing in this region where storms are known to pop up. And the text says that as they're going, sure enough, they're rocking back and forth with waves on every side. And they're a little bit terrified, maybe a little bit of fear of losing their lives. So if you got seasoned boatmen on a boat that are afraid, it's not a great storm. I have only been sick on a boat one time, and it was bad. On our cruise this week, we were watching the Aqua show, and there was a pool that they were diving into from a high dive. And before the show, it's on the back of the ship, before the show, you could see the water level doing this. And it's just enough that if you don't like being on the water, it triggers your brain to know that what you're on is not steady. I was okay. Kirsty, on the other hand, was not okay. She had 4 Dramamine patches, all over, and she just was like this. She was like, tell me when it's over. I got sick one time. I grew up sailing, doing things like that with my parents. One time we were in a storm. The boat was like this. The guy wire that keeps you in the boat was almost in the water, and I was just leaning over, throwing up endlessly. And the worst part about it is there's nothing you can do to make it not that anymore. I don't know if you've ever been stuck in a boat that's in bad water. You're just stuck. You can't do anything. So that was the only time I really got sick. But these guys were scared, and I was scared in the storm. If you've been on it and the guys on the boat that normally boat are scared, you should probably be scared, right? This is where we're at. Different versions would say the disciples think they're in trouble. They're far from land, and Jesus comes out to them. Maybe this is the miracle of the story, this gift we can use, right? That when you're in trouble, when you're facing the problem or the crisis or the decision feels too big to make by yourself, you're praying for a certain outcome. I pray for healing, I pray for a way out, I pray for the storm to calm. But underneath all of those things there's the real question underneath it that we don't ever really dare to say out loud. Does God care at all? And what's the difference between a God that doesn't care about me and no God at all? Whether or not things change is how I'll sense if God is going with me into the storm. Will God draw near into the chaos in my life when things are unresolved? Or is God only interested in drawing me near when I feel spiritual? These are these underlying questions to this little story. So if you want to know what God's like, Jesus is a good place to look. The good news is that God is present in the unresolved. Storms of life bring sorrow, and healing doesn't come when relationships are in turmoil, when the storm isn't calm, when the waves are in over our head, and everybody knows that nobody can walk out on water. Jesus comes through, and despite all the limitations, is present in the trouble. Maybe that's the gift of this story. Maybe. But what we see here is Jesus' appearance sometimes is terrifying. This is they're scared of the storm. Don't miss that they're afraid of the storm. And there's this experience that the disciples have that the text says that the disciples were scared of Jesus because he might be a ghost. Did you catch it? They're afraid of the storm. They're being whipped back and forth. They're being buffeted by the winds against it. And Jesus walks out, and the disciples, already terrified of everything else, says they're terrified. It's a ghost! They cry out in fear. Now they're scared of this as well. Now the text tells us the word of the Lord came from Jesus and lets them know that it's him. And he says, don't be afraid. Take courage is a way to translate that. I'm here. The original translation to that, if you want to be a little bit closer to what it's saying, is take courage, I am. Don't be afraid. Boy, where have we heard that before? I am. Little nod that Matthew gives us to the burning bush. The same words spoken to Moses. Now God able to meet people in circumstances when their lives are threatened to lead them through to deliverance. That sounds familiar to Moses and these disciples here. But before that deliverance comes, before their situation changes, before they're out of the jam that they're in that could cost them everything, I am is there with them. They have the power to be not afraid even if they face some loss. And then comes the part that most of us actually really want to focus on when we get to this message. And the text says that Peter yells out to Jesus and he says, hey, if it's really you, tell me to come out and walk on the water. And Jesus says, yeah, come on. And so Peter, who lives with his foot in his mouth most of the time, goes over the side of the boat and starts walking towards Jesus. But when he sees the strong winds and the waves, he becomes terrified again and begins to sink. And he shouts, save me. And he reached out and was grabbed by Jesus, and his response to him, he says, you of so little faith, why did you doubt me? This is the part we usually focus on in the story. And there's a lot going on. There's just a lot going on. And I think we usually move pretty fast through this, because much like a gift that we receive, but we don't have a lot of use for, we assume the gift is primarily for somebody else. You get through this and you go, wow, great. I don't know what to do with this. This is an interesting story. I'm not sure what the church is supposed to take from this to give to other people. Because we assume that the story is about Jesus and Peter. It's like, but if you hover over this text, I start to realize that there are some things that Peter does in this passage that might actually be more useful to think about in our own discipleship. A couple things. First thing that Peter did that might be useful for us to be a better gift for us is that he asked for what he needed. When Jesus says, it's me, Peter says, prove it. Prove it. All the disciples are probably thinking it, right? They think a ghost is walking on the water, and they're terrified, and the ghost is like, actually, I'm just Jesus. And they're all like, okay. And Peter, because he doesn't know when to not talk, or maybe he's great at talking when he should, says, prove it. As usual, when Peter speaks, he's oftentimes speaking for us. If you're reading this text and you don't have the bird's eye narrative of it, and a random ghost-looking thing starts walking on water and it says, I'm Jesus, you're probably like, okay, how do I know you're Jesus? Like, tell me how to believe in this moment. I don't know what it's like to have to ask God to have me walk on water, but I do know what it's like to wonder if I could have those promises too. How do I know? See, I've had moments, and I'm not the only one in here, where I've wanted to ask God for something that was completely and utterly supernatural beyond anything possible. Only to have that get stuck in my throat. Because I'm sure, if I'm not sure God's going to come through for me, it's a lot easier to just not ask God and be disappointed in nothing. You with me? You've had it, get it here, and you go, if this doesn't come through, I'm going to be disappointed. And so you swallow it back down. Are you with me here? I don't want to be disappointed if I don't get it. And Peter has every opportunity to not ask Jesus for something here. But he does. It's dark. I'm scared. I don't have any idea if that's even you out there. You could be a ghost. But if it's really you, then you need to tell me something that only I am could do. If we were being honest, I would say that we've often wondered in our own circumstances if God is ever with us at all. And even if He is, sometimes we're afraid to ask God to prove it. Because if we're let down, it'll kill us. Peter's example, one of the best things that we could do is to have the courage to ask God to be with us in ways that we actually feel that we need. Peter needed to know. Peter needed to know. The second thing that Peter does that I think is often helpful is that he actually believed he could do what Jesus responded with. I don't think many of us, if we're in the boat that night, suspected this best case scenario for Peter. Let's say we know the person on the water is actually Jesus. Worst case scenario, it's a ghost. But if I see someone walking on water, what I think to myself is, wow, good for them. Good for them. I'm glad I have a boat. I'll stay, I'm good in the boat here. But what Peter says is, I want in. And what I love about Peter all the time, and in this story in particular, is even though his faith is oftentimes followed by an embarrassment, his initial impulse is usually pretty good. His initial impulse is to believe that the disciples of Jesus are actually capable of doing what He does. His impulses are good. They get him in trouble, but his impulse is good. That's not the posture that most of us take when we read through Scripture and we see the stuff that Jesus does. Oftentimes we go, that's really great the disciples did that, or they could do these things. We see Jesus praying and forgiving and healing and having empathy, and we think to ourselves, that is so nice for Him. He doesn't have kids. Last night was the first night we've done bedtime in a while with our children, and we got both the girls in bed, and we sat down on the couch, and I went, this is exhausting. I forgot how horrible bedtimes are. Darlene's cracking up because she did them for a week by herself. But you just dinner, even just eating food is Jesus, He didn't have kids. He wasn't married. He didn't have to know the 5 dreaded holidays. He didn't have to remember all these things. He didn't have distractions of those things, or the losses, or the mortgages. And so we say we believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life, the best way to live, but underneath all those things, we make all kinds of excuses why all of those things He does don't work for us. They're not the gifts for me. I think the greatest challenge in churches is that we call ourselves Christians without actually believing that we can do what Jesus did. I've done that for years. The challenge that most of us is not will we become wicked or faithless or disobedient, but the challenge for most of us is that we will just be like a completely middling, self-righteous, kind of faithful, mostly obedient, whatever. We're doing our devotions and we're praying, but we're holding the grudges. We're obsessing over how much money we could possibly keep for ourselves. What's our budget line look like for this one? We're still being more disciplined, more discipled by the voices in the news and the media that keep us defensive and resentful and terrified for our own existence more than we are to being open, wise, and sacrificing ourselves for the betterment of others. We're a burned out light bulb. We've got all the equipment there to give us light, but just the fuels, we don't have it anymore. There's no energy running through it. And so it's not a surprise that over time we reduce our spiritual practice to this sliver of our existence. Quiet time with the Bible so we can justify going about the rest of our life the way we want to. But it's just kind of like walking on water. It's not really for us. That was Peter's thing. It's just the life that only walks the way of Jesus when we're headed where we are already going. That's the one we like. Peter says even if it feels impossible, even if there's no frame of reference for this sort of thing, you could follow Jesus into a new way of living. The third thing that he did, and I think that we can learn from him in this, is that Peter failed into an embrace. A few steps out of the boat, and the water and the initial impulse of faith, Peter starts to fall. And this is the sermon that you've heard before. This is the one that you've heard anywhere before. The moral of the story, right, is that Peter didn't have enough faith. He lost a little bit there. So sad. You can do better. This is the one we've heard before, right? You can do better than that. If you just have a little bit more faith than Peter, you can do impossible things that are even better than walking on water. I love it. It's so simple. I just love, we'll put a bow on it. Adam, kick the camera. No, we've heard that one before. It's tempting to read this as this moral story. If you just don't doubt and God will be a part of your miracle. Great. Call me cynical, but I am not convinced that most of us are going to do any better than Peter. It's like, I don't think any of us are going to do a lot better than him. Because walking the Jesus way, loving your enemies, forgiving those that hurt you, confessing, repenting, giving money away in a world that's bent on taking care of ourselves and grabbing more for ourselves is not natural. We talked about this with the one another. It's counterintuitive. And so once again, when his head goes below the waves, Peter is standing there for us. I don't know if I would have even gotten the foot to float for half a second before I started to sink. He got at least 2 steps. He's trying to be faithful, even as the circumstances around overwhelm him. And so Jesus catches him and says, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" It might be more accurate to read Jesus saying, "How many times will I have to save you before you know I can be trusted to catch you? How long will you have to worry about your life because you think you're the primary one in charge? How often will you ignore the ways that I try to love and complain that I didn't show up? How much pain will I have to go through with you until you know that I couldn't catch you?" Maybe there's still those of us in the church that need to know that when we find ourselves obedient but completely out of our depth, God will keep pulling us, saying, "I'm with you. I'm still able to do for you what you thought you could do for yourself." The fourth thing that Peter does here is he makes sense of the miracle with the community. Peter walks by himself, and then he sinks by himself, but the storm doesn't calm down just yet. Did you catch it? Did you catch it? He sees the winds and is afraid, begins to sink. "Save me." Jesus catches him and says, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" And then they climbed into the boat, and then the wind and the seas died down. It doesn't calm down until he's back in the boat with everybody. These guys on the boat, soaked to the bone with the storm water, make sense of what they saw Jesus do and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And then they pick up their oars and they start to row. If you zoom out a little bit here, you can see that some of what it seems like we're supposed to take away from this is that the church is the place where we sometimes try and fail to walk like Jesus. Where sometimes we're successful at it, and a lot of times we're not. But we return to bear witness to the fact that God is with us and able to walk through those things, even if they seem overwhelming. Tempted as we might be to leave or belittle the church or find ourselves suspicious of all the stuff that's in there, the church is still the place where God does, in and through the people, what he can do more than what any of us could do by ourselves. Peter made sense of what went on returning to his community. He didn't stand in the water with Jesus and was like, whoa. He got in the boat, the storms calmed, and they figured out what was going on. It's the place where when we're tempted to forget that God can be trusted, we can come back and pick up our oars and remember until God calms the storm again. Those are the 4 little gifts that Peter gives us inside of this story. But how does the church today unpack these things in a way that's useful in any capacity? Anyone ever, I do this when I even do this when I was telling, we were riding in the car, and Kirsten said, what are you preaching on next week? Because I said I was preaching next week. Kyle is napping, I'm assuming still. He had a backup for today. And I said, I'm doing the parable of the walking on water. Anyone ever say that? Or is it just me? I go, the little parable, the story of Jesus, the water. He walks on water, right? A parable, of course, is a made-up story that Jesus tells to illustrate a true principle. But this isn't a parable. But my brain, whenever I think about it, I go, the parable, walking on water, that one. I don't know why I do that. It's a gospel account. And so what does that say about my own way of thinking about it? It's like, I just mistake it for a story. There's something, it's a fairy tale for me to pull something out of. It's an illustration that God can be trusted. Take on that tone of this fairy tale, this story. I prefer to interpret it that way in my brain, maybe because I want distance from the idea that God would cause me to do something that I don't know how to do, and I would fail if He didn't intervene. Right? It keeps me at a distance from it. I don't want to fail at something. I don't want to take 2 steps and sink and have to have somebody rescue me from it. I'll just stay in the boat. Nice parable there about. I'm the person who wants to believe that God can empower me to do something miraculous like walking on water, but I'm also the kind of person that probably packed floaties just in case. Right? Part of that is because I really do think that God works through a really good plan. But part of that is because I have asked God to do things that seem impossible, and it hasn't been delivered in quite the way that I wanted it to happen. So I get my floaties just in case. I want my mechanisms in my life that keep me in charge of what's coming up next. It's a lot easier. I got backups to backups. I got plan A, B, C, D, E, and F, G, right? Just in case. I believed in Jesus, but I trusted in me. My faith was in myself. And I don't think I'm alone in that sentiment. My hunch is that there's a lot of us that find our belief directed at Jesus, but our trust directed to ourselves. It's like, sure, Jesus could, he could build my house, I'm sure. He's a carpenter. I'm going to just go ahead and hire McClurg. I think he'll do a good job. That's a bad example, but you see what I mean. We go to work, we come home, and we complain that we're tired. I'm tired after a vacation. We go to various social commitments and gatherings, and we gradually end up adjusting our hopes for nothing more than just surviving the next thing that exists on our calendar and hoping that maybe someday we'll have the margin to be the kind of person I really want to become. Ashton and I, we say this thing, we read it somewhere, and we say it every single night. We go, you know what? One of these days will never happen. You're like, hey, when the kids are it's always there. There's always something, right? One of these days will never happen. One of these days we'll have the space, ability, time, and energy to do the things and become the person we really want to become. When we don't have cheer camp every night and bedtime and we are exhausted from work and then there's soccer, t-ball on the weekends and then zoo camp and then blah, 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 blah. You with me? And so discipleship ends up being this perpetual New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. It's like this perpetual resolution. Someday I will do reading more. Someday I will pray more. I'll obey this call that God has laid on my life for a long time, right? But it's this perpetual resolution. And like most people's New Year's resolutions, they never get done. because you can never find the time to do it. The gyms are only busy the first month of January. Then they're empty after that. We're terrible at this. So instead, we live these lives that can be recognized as Christian. I sure look like it, but we never really, we don't really ever look like Jesus' life. We cling to the security that we find because inside of ourselves, we're really just not sure of how Jesus could hold us. And so we've built this life that doesn't require him to do so. The miracle, right, may not have been the gift that we were asking for, but it's the gift we need. Because the first call of this text in this morning is to get out of the boat. And I think some of us already know that we're called to do something, but we put it off because it's just it feels a little too risky. It feels a little too risky. It's stepping out of a scarcity mindset with your time. Instead of thinking, I don't have time to serve other people. I don't have time to use my skills or my space or put my weight in the way of Jesus, which is, how to be a blessing, even if that means realigning your schedule. Others need to step out of reputation and find a way to confess the things that we've hidden beneath a good reputation, so long as it's made, our hearts seem to rot from it. And I imagine a couple of us might be hearing God speak to us about the way that we use our money, calling budget not to use us for our future, to build wealth, but to have generosity. Not just in our dreams and our hopes, but in somebody else's dreams, somebody else's good fortune. The objections, the reasons not to do this are super real. Peter's a fisherman who's been on the water a lot. There's a lot of reasons he knows he should stay in the boat. They're good reasons. They're really good reasons. Drowning, worst way to die. Couldn't fathom a worse thing. Demetri Martin tells the darkest joke ever. He said, if you were about to drown, I always carry potato chips with me so that you were a little bit thirsty right before it happened. The only way to make it work, right? Peter's got good reasons to stay in the boat. They're good reasons to want to hoard, to not say your time. They're not real. It might cost us money, time, reputation, something you care about even more than all those things combined. Like Peter, some of us might be thinking, if this goes wrong, I'm not going to swim in this water. But there's Jesus standing on the water saying, I know. Do it anyway. You don't think I can catch you? Don't you want a life where instead of walking in your way, you follow Jesus, sometimes doubting, it's like sometimes sinking, but being held up by the God that catches you after you stumble, but at least your stumble went towards him? Some of us need to step out of the boat. Others of us, that's the second call Peter gives us here in this passage. And I think we've gotten out of the boat, and we're a few steps into obedience. And although our initial impulse was to believe that God could be trusted, we find ourselves in the middle of the water, out of our depths, starting to drown, and we feel at risk. We're out of control. We're a little bit ashamed that our best efforts at obedience have let us in way over our head. And the second call for those of us this morning is to say with Peter, save me. Because we need God to intervene. And we need to hear Jesus' words standing on the water. I am. Don't be afraid. Both are conversions of our second sort of step into discipleship, which is of trust, of faith. I believe in Jesus. I followed him. I was curious. But I trust myself a little bit here still. I'll sure look like I'm following him, but I'll have a few backup plans. Both are ways to allow God to hold us in places where we can no longer hold ourselves. But we trust to take blind steps of faith, knowing that one waits on the water to catch us even if we fail. Let's pray.